You're listening to The Weather Junkies.
Oh boy. A large wedge tornado coming up into Tuscaloosa. A winter storm warning is in effect for our area.
So we can expect at least another 2 to 4 inches overnight. Then that snow.
The National Weather Service in Huntsville has issued a tornado warning for northwestern Massachusetts.
14 to 22 inches of snow!
Good Wednesday evening. Welcome to this episode of The Weather Junkies. We are joining you live this evening here on YouTube. This is the first time that we've done a live episode, so we're very excited to try something new. Of course, I'm Tyler Jankowski, joining the broadcast from the East Coast. I'm based in Connecticut, and alongside me we have Dakota Smith joining us now from Colorado. I won't quite call it the West Coast, but Dakota, you're with us now, right?
Yes. Hello. Glad to be back on another episode. I'm the resident grad student on this podcast. And yeah, I'm in Fort Collins, Colorado. And Tyler, I'm going to jump right into the weather that we've had.
Yes, it's been exciting. Snow.
Oh my gosh. Well, lack of snow. For Fort Collins, at least. We had this big mid-latitude cyclone cut across the United States, and it brought blizzard conditions to eastern Colorado, western Kansas, and then it brought severe weather into the Midwest and Central Plains. I guess mainly Central Plains, sorry. And we were forecast for a few inches of snow. I stayed up, woke up early, didn't see a single flake. We were under a winter weather advisory, and not a single flake, and that was due to downsloping winds, some dry, warm downsloping winds, really cut off any snow production around here. But then today, it was quite the windstorm we had. We had gusts up to 75 miles per hour here in Fort Collins.
Wow.
With sustained winds around 40, 45 for like an hour. And there was also a gust of 94 miles per hour in Boulder, Colorado. And there are a few 100-mile-per-hour in some higher terrain areas. So, yeah, it's been a crazy few days out here. How about yourself?
We have actually enjoyed a stretch of dry weather once again, but finally the system that brought that weather to you is dragging its front through here tomorrow. We're expecting heavy rain, perhaps up to an inch in spots. Here in Connecticut, we have a deficit of about 8 inches so far this year, so we need the rain. But looking in the long term, first next week, we have a cold blast. We're talking really just below seasonable levels in the afternoon and in the morning, but nothing impressive, certainly not record-breaking. And one of the thoughts I had today was, some of the smaller ski areas here in Connecticut try to open by Thanksgiving, or at least that's the goal in September. Yeah. And if my memory serves me correctly, you really don't start snowmaking, at least here in Connecticut, until you have at least a couple of days that remain below freezing the whole day. Otherwise, it's not worth it because you really need an all-out effort to get the base down.
Right.
And I don't see any of that in the next two or more weeks. I mean, you look at, for example, the 850 millibar temperatures on the models, and you look at the blast next week, there's really nothing that rivals that in the whole length of the model run. And next week, as I said, we were like in the 40s for highs. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens at this.
Gotcha. So some of the ski towns out there could be hurting a little bit.
Well, I don't know if they're called ski towns,
well,
but
ski resort. Yeah.
Northern New England, definitely. Where they have a little less snowmaking and a little bit more of a reliance on natural snow. Could be a tough season.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I got a little used to the Rocky Mountains.
Yeah, it's not quite Colorado here in Connecticut. But anyways, that aside, the weather, it's been pretty much above average, and quite boring aside from an occasional bout of rain, and that's exactly what we have tomorrow.
Yeah, that front is certainly impressive. It pretty much stretches north to south, the entire continental.
A lot of severe weather. Of course, we're in the heart of the so-called second season, I believe it is.
Yeah.
And
Early
a
fall.
lot of tornadoes, and a lot of tornadic debris signatures. But we're not going to get there quite yet. That's in our next segment. So we're doing a little foreshadowing.
Yeah, there were 40 some tornado reports from the outbreak on Monday. Sorry, it was Monday.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that there were dozens of tornadoes. Of course, that total number of reports is always a little bit sketchy because.
Well, that's not how many tornadoes there were. That's just the reports.
Yeah, duplicates and
yeah,
hopefully not, but erroneous reports. So yeah, definitely active though, and it's still ongoing now. To the east, I saw a confirmed tornado in the Atlanta area, Atlanta, Georgia, and that storm also had a tornadic debris signature. So an awful lot of those this week.
Yeah, it'll be interesting how that. It looks like it's gonna hit a lot of some of the East Coast. The front's gonna hit a lot of the East Coast cities, kind of during rush hour tomorrow morning. Provide quite the drenching for.
Yeah, for us, it's more in the evening, but definitely almost everyone being impacted. How much have you looked forward in terms of the forecast for the next couple of days?
For here?
Here, yeah, there or anywhere.
Well, it's interesting because I'm actually coming out east this weekend for Thanksgiving and next week. So I've been looking at some of the Maryland forecasts, and it looks nice. It's going to be sunny, I think, this weekend. Out here, I actually don't know. I know that we're kind of in this pattern where we're going to have some storms move through. It looks like there's another one pegged on some of the longer range models. It might end up more west than the past two have. But other than that, that's really all that I've looked into for the next week or so.
Aside from Connecticut, my focus has been on State College and
I see where you're going with this.
And Columbus, Ohio. Obviously, two major games this weekend, both broadcast nationwide on ABC. The noon game in State College looks fine, dry, around or just below average, which would be in the middle 40s. I'll take that because the weather could be terrible this time of year. And it actually looks like if the game had been later in the day, there could have been some weather issues with a front coming through in a gusty wind picking up. So even though a noon start for a Penn State whiteout is not ideal, I think I'll take it. For the Columbus game, though, if there's any Ohio State fans that watch, that game starts at 3:30, and there's going to be quite a sneaky little storm rolling through, some rain and perhaps snow showers, but I think maybe the wind will be the highlight of that game. It looks nasty, especially later in the day, and 3:30 start could go right to 7. So it'll be a
run game.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what it looks like on TV later Saturday afternoon from Columbus. That'll be interesting. So
yeah, we'll definitely keep our eyes peeled. They'll have to resort to their run game if it's that method.
They will. That's enough football for this episode, probably. Our next segment is checking out the Twitterverse, correct?
Yeah, I said this last time, but the weather Twitterverse is a weird, crazy, awesome place, and we're going to visit some of the highlights and maybe some of the lowlights that we saw in the past week. If you're just joining us, you can follow us on Twitter at the Weather Junkies. That's at the WX Junkies. And if you have a question or comment, feel free to submit it, and we'll bring it up on our episode.
Yeah, that's the great thing about doing this live interaction. So if you have any questions, definitely send them along, not only to the Weather Junkies, but we are both on Twitter. So if you have difficulty finding the account or whatever it may be, we have a couple of ways that you can reach out to us. Twitter obviously preferred because the notification noise will go off and hopefully we won't miss it. But
Yeah.
let's dive right in and check out the first tweet that we're talking about tonight. We're going to try something new and actually show the tweet on the screen. So stand by here for a second and we'll have the tweet in 3, 2, should be up now. Do you see it, Dakota?
Not yet. And there it is.
There it is. A little bit of a delay getting across the country. So we talked about the severe weather earlier in the week. Now, here's a tweet from November 16th, so not too long ago, 2 days ago. Jim Cantore tweeting an animation of a radar product. It's an advanced feature that we call correlation coefficient. Not something that you see on your typical weather app, but it is very helpful. It's probably one of my favorite radar tools because in the world of meteorology, there's not a lot of things that are 100% known, not a lot of things that you can say with 100% confidence. And when you have a tornadic debris signature, you can say with 100% confidence that a tornado has touched down.
I did not know that it was that certain. Wow.
I am very sure that that's the case. There's a lot of hesitation. Naturally, there's a lot of hesitation by especially broadcasters to call it a confirmed tornado because obviously for years and years, the method was always, or the process was always to wait for the National Weather Service to go out and conduct a storm survey. And certainly that is necessary to determine strength and survey the damage, but you can confirm a tornado using radar. And that's the beauty of tornado debris signatures.
Right.
Obviously, it's not great that damage is being caused, but the fact that radar can confirm a tornado can perhaps save a lot of lives if a storm is heading towards a heavily populated place. So,
right. And with this one, we had the velocity scan that really showed that. I mean, you didn't even need the. I know the coefficient looks awesome, but for this one, I believe it was a pretty tight couplet, at least for part of its life. Yeah, it was a crazy outbreak.
and there have been I'd say at least a half dozen of these tornado signatures in the last couple days. I haven't kept track, but it seems like every time there's a bunch of warnings, at least one of them has tornadic debris signatures. So worth all the money that was invested in this radar upgrade over the last couple of years. All right, the next tweet is about the Pacific Northwest from Twitter user Zach, and he is a student, a PhD student at UC Irvine, previously went to Cornell for an atmospheric science degree. So this was your tweet, Dakota. You wanted to show this, so tell us more.
Yeah. So I've been following this story a little bit. Pacific Northwest has gotten quite the bit of precipitation, and I saw some crazy QPF chart maps of a lot of snow in the higher terrains, and it's from this atmospheric river coming off of the Pacific. And I just love this plot right here is just beautiful. But the it would have been beautiful without the animation, but the animation really does it justice. And after they got all this rain and snow, they had a windstorm that produced gusts in some of the higher terrains of 100 mile per hour, and combined with the saturated soils and the gusty winds, there was quite a bit of power outages, trees going down. I saw a headline that said 1 million people without power. I think it also unfortunately took a few lives. So they're having quite the they had quite the active weather system move through. And Zach, if you want to follow him, he's at ZLabe. He's always putting out figures. So if you want cool weather figures to kind of nerd out on, check out Zach.
Yes, he is a good follow. I follow him, and a lot of good stuff coming across. Our next tweet is interesting. It's kind of in left field.
Yeah, so I this was my tweet also, and I didn't really want to talk. You can check it out if you want, but and it's kind of painful. It's like a weenie war. And it's hard to read, but I think it brings up an important point that people, the general public, need to get their weather information from a credible source. And in the day and age of social media and Facebook and Twitter, that's not always the case, because people come out with these very sensational and big headlines that draw people's interest but aren't necessarily accurate. So I think this brings up a good point that, we need to make sure that the public is getting the right information from the right sources. I'm not trying to, downplay amateur meteorologists, because that amateur meteorologist just means you don't have a degree. It doesn't mean you can't be a good forecaster.
Certainly an interesting lawsuit, and there are a lot of people on Twitter that do not have meteorology degrees but are pretty good forecasters, better than some people that have meteorology degrees. Because just because you have a meteorology degree doesn't mean that you forecast the weather. Certainly doesn't mean that automatically.
Yeah.
And so I try to have an open mind and digest a lot of things that come across, even if it's not necessarily from the all-star forecaster that stands out on Twitter. And I try to keep it positive. No, I don't think I would ever attack someone on Twitter, but this lawsuit is certainly, I would say it's the first of its kind, probably, in the social media world for weather forecasting. If you want to get more information, all you have to do is Google Weatherboy Lawsuit and it'll come up.
Yeah, to one of your points, I have a meteorology degree, but I am by no means a good forecaster, especially in Colorado, where I now live. It's a whole different animal.
So our next tweet is kind of exciting. When I first saw this flash across on Twitter, I was like, that is a good idea. I never have seen something like it before, and I'm surprised that it hasn't been done before. But it's a sunset forecast for the United States.
Yeah, this is from our good friend, Jacob DeFlitch. You can follow him at WXDeFlitch. And him, in combination with Ben Reppert and Steve Hallett, have created this sunset forecast. It uses output from the NAM 4-kilometer high-res NAM. And from what I got, they use a combination of humidity at upper levels. It sounds like they go to 200 millibars, and pressure. And basically, they're trying to figure out where low and high clouds are. Because if you have low clouds, you may not see the sunset, and if you have high clouds, well, those are just a landscape for the sun to shine on and produce some of those vivid sunsets. And this couldn't come from a more perfect person, because we all know how much those two, Jake and Ben, who I know personally, they love their sunset forecasts. So I think it's an awesome idea. So awesome job, Jacob.
I think it's a great idea, and I think there is a lot of improvement that can be made to the model. Obviously we don't know what goes into it exactly, but anything on initial release can have improvements, and I think that a lot of things could be added. One thing I was wondering would be cool is if you had sort of a day-night mask on the map.
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
As the hours go by, I don't know how difficult that would be, but I would assume that this graphic here is made in a program called grads. And that's the other thing I wanted to bring up. It seems like ever since probably Weatherbell, unless I'm mistaken, came up with basically a lot of maps that had a lot of eye candy on them, very smooth color tables that had almost every color possible. It seems like there has been a massive development of websites, startup websites offering free weather models that all kind of look the same. Kind of breaking away from the traditions set by the e-wall, which is very usable, but it does not necessarily have the same amount of eye candy. It's very usable, and that's the one thing I like about the e-wall. For something like a sunset map like this, though, there's really nothing wrong with having everything smoothed out, as you see here.
That's a funny point. The e-wall is definitely kind of industrial, and just to get the forecasting job done, it's not pretty by any means.
My favorite thing about the e-wall is probably how the 70% relative humidity at 700 millibars is contoured. Anyways, our next tweet, it's our fifth and final tweet, was one that I suggested, tweeted by Jan Null, and his biography says that he's a meteorologist in the San Francisco Bay Area for 4 decades as a National Weather Service forecaster and a CCM. And what he tweeted was, get ready, a graph of El Nino, the big bad El Nino, and the graph is a comparison between this year and 1997. For those of you that don't know, 1997, 1998 was a large El Nino. It's one that a lot of people look back on to compare things to and really to stack against. And this is a chart of weekly information. So with El Nino, the definition of El Nino is anomalously warm sea surface temperatures in the equatorial eastern Pacific Ocean. You could get data back to the 1800s from the Climate Prediction Center. Most people do not use that as a basis for records because it's somewhat reconstructed based on what I know. A lot of record keeping for El Nino began around 1950, and then weekly records around 1990. And this is looking at weekly records of El Ninos. In other words, one value per week. And so it's very sensitive to small changes. And this past week's observation was an anomaly of 3.0. And that is a new record for weekly data for El Nino in the Nino 3.4 region. So it's no doubt it's an impressive El Nino that we have on our hands.
Yeah, if you haven't heard about the El Nino, then you're probably living under a rock because every major news source has talked about it, and I mean, how many times, I don't know how many times I've seen the word Godzilla El Nino, and it's not the best thing, right? Just to see stuff like that, but I guess it means that people know about it and that it's happening, which is good. But this El Nino is definitely impressive. But you can't not call it impressive. Just looking at the data, it's interesting how it looks like the 1998 or it's 97 on here. It looks like it ranker than the one that we're having right now, at least at the beginning of the year.
So one of the more commonly used methods of tracking El Nino is either monthly or every 3 months. The average, there's a lot of different averaging that goes on, and really you could get a whole bunch of different numbers depending on the source that you go to. But this data I downloaded directly from the Climate Prediction Center, and the chart here, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but the year 2015, month of October, so this past month, ranks in the top 10 for greatest warm anomalies. Just the month of October, the anomaly was 2.46 above average. That's, of course, degrees Celsius. And the greatest anomaly here, and this goes back to 1980, I believe. So you could even go back farther to 1950, depending on which data set you download. But as an example, 1983 tops this list at 2.79, an anomaly of 2.79. So we're not quite there yet when you average a whole month out, but a lot of projections do take us there. And we'll delve deeper into this in our main segment, right, Dakota?
Yeah, I think we're there, and we're going to talk about El Nino today, and I think I touched on it, but the thing that I've seen that's kind of been unfortunate is making El Nino this type of monster that's going to make everything bad and everything terrible. And I even saw this. It was by some LA news source, and they made like a mini documentary about finding El Nino, searching for it, which really makes it seem like you're looking for like the Loch Ness monster or something. And I think it's just kind of silly, and it takes away the importance of the science and what actually El Nino means for different areas of getting to that point. El Nino does normally mean certain patterns are going to develop across the world, and here in the United States, normally we have the lower, I guess, southern part of the United States is usually wetter,
including California.
East, yeah, California. Well, specifically Southern California, yeah, and it's a little cooler down in South Central, Southeastern United States, and then in the northern U.S. and parts of Canada, it's warmer typically.
And that is exactly what the longer range models are predicting over the next couple of months.
Yeah, so in terms of producing kind of a seasonal general forecast for temperatures, temperature anomalies, and moisture precipitation anomalies, it does a pretty good job. And out here in Colorado, there's kind of an interesting, I guess, pattern that develops. Do you have any idea? I'm curious to see what you think, because I was completely unaware. But in the winter, would you think it'd be wetter or drier out here?
In your area?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm putting on the spot here.
I'm actually not sure, because I haven't paid a whole lot of attention to western areas, other than obviously California getting needed rainfall. But for us, I mean, to steer it back in a direction that I'm familiar with, it certainly looks like we could be on a low end for snowfall this winter, a really low end. I believe in 97, 98, the season total was around 11 inches in the Hartford area. The average is around 45 inches. Yeah. So, I mean, that would be major news if that's how this winter plays out.
Yeah, that would be a bummer. So out here, the weather. So there's this organization out here called Weather 5280, reference elevation, and they do a great job with forecasting and talking about everything weather out here in Colorado. And I forget the meteorologist, Matt Makins, wrote up this article about El Nino and how it impacts the moisture in our winter. And the winter months, December, January, February, are normally pretty dry compared to average. But the early spring, late fall months generally pack a punch when it comes to snowfall. And they even get some of the bigger storms in El Nino years. Let's see, 57, this is a cool stat, 57% of the storms in Boulder that have been greater than 20 inches have occurred in El Nino years. So more than half, the majority of snowstorms that put out 20 inches or more of snow happen during the El Nino years. So it's kind of a weird thing. Our winter is actually pretty dry, but then we get these snowfalls in the early spring and late fall.
Yeah, for us, let's try to take another look at the records of temperatures. I actually lost the Google Hangouts window. There it is. Okay. I'm going to change this back over to our records for, let's see, what is this? This is monthly information. I don't know that I did a thorough enough job explaining this before, so we're going to jump back and take a look. This shows you the monthly information for the El Nino anomalies over the last couple of decades. You see at the top of the list we have 1983 coming in with a 2.79, and that is at the top of the list for this data set. You see 2015 is a couple down at about 2.5 degrees above average, 2.46. So still a ways to go when it comes to the monthly averages. This El Nino is forecast to peak in January, roughly around January. So we still have plenty of time for the anomaly to grow to perhaps 2.8 degrees above average, and that would take the cake for greatest on record here. So the news this week was that the highest ever weekly anomaly was set at 3 degrees, and so that basically means, what is the significance? Well, the week was warm, but there's a lot of sensitive things that go on from a week to week basis. So you can't always read into the week by week change. So, when you average out the month of November, it's probably not going to be +3. It's probably going to be more like maybe plus 2.6 or plus 2.7. Certainly not 3.0 this month. So we did show the chart of typical patterns across the United States in a strong El Nino. We'll go back to that and take a look, and you can see this now, Dakota, right?
Yeah.
So this is from the Climate Prediction Center, typical January through March weather anomalies during a moderate to strong El Nino. No doubt this is a strong El Nino, and you see the warm shading here across the northern portion of the country. And as we said a few minutes ago, that's exactly what the models are showing. And in fact, probably for a larger area extending all the way over to the northeast. And you have the wetness in Southern California and across the southern United States with a persistent Pacific jet stream. And you notice the polar jet here to the north of the United States. So whenever you have a flow right off the Pacific Ocean, that's never a good sign if you want a lot of snow, because obviously the Pacific Ocean is not a source of cold air. So for snow lovers, it could turn out to be a very disappointing winter. At least that's what many of the signs are pointing to now. But
in the Northeast.
Yes, in the Northeast. That's a great point, because a lot of the snow that's been occurring out west has been
We may have just lost Tyler. Tyler, are you with us? All right. Well, it sounds like we lost Tyler, but I But getting back to Tyler, are you back?
It says I'm experiencing network difficulties.
Okay.
I think the connection will be better now. I've moved my laptop so it's facing a different direction. But we kind of started out on an interesting topic that I want to go back to, and that's the big bad El Nino and how people think of it when they first hear the word El Nino.
Yeah.
You see a lot of news stories saying it's coming. El Nino, it's coming. But El Nino doesn't move. So, anytime you can turn something into a moving storm or a deadly storm, it's enticing. It gets clicks. But El Nino is not a storm, and El Nino is not moving. So that was what I saw a story about that and a tweet about that this week, and I laughed at it. And the other thing is, at least, what were you saying?
I never thought about it like that. I never realized that some people might actually think it's like a hurricane.
Yeah, I mean, well, when you start tossing around polar vortex,
yeah,
it's a term that no one has heard, and it's moving, so everything must move.
That's scary to think about.
And the other thing about that is here, at least in Connecticut and probably across the whole Northeast, when you say El Nino, people think, oh my gosh, we're getting a lot of snow. But that is rarely the case in the case of a strong El Nino. And we're certainly more confident on the temperature side of things as opposed to how much snow falls. So we'll see how it plays out. Obviously, seasonal forecasts can go in a totally opposite direction, but at this point, it's not looking encouraging for a lot of snow.
Right. I hope it's different out here. I like snow, and I'm hoping we get one of the bigger ones that they have gotten in previous big El Nino years. The Capital Weather Gang put out a pretty interesting article. If you don't know who they are, they're forecast part of the Washington Post that forecasts for the DC area, and they highlighted some of the historical storms that have occurred in El Ninos and strong El Ninos rather, and some of the bigger storms have occurred in El Nino years, just like. So it's interesting that you can get these kind of big storms that dump a lot of snow. But then other years they show in strong El Nino years, 1972 to 1973, they just received 1/10 of an inch of snow. That was a strong El Nino. And then other years they've received 40 plus inches of snow during strong El Nino years. So in some places, you have a decent grasp on your precipitation, but other places during a strong El Nino, you really don't. That's the weather. It's volatile and hard to forecast, as you well know.
Yes, definitely. So I mean, it's going to be exciting either way as we go forward. Certainly with an El Nino that likely will be record breaking, and it'll generate a lot of headlines, hopefully accurate headlines. So that was our discussion this week. Of course, we probably have some people saying, "Hey, wait a minute, what about climate change?" And you have more to say about that topic, right?
Yeah, to all the people out there that are regular listeners, always listening to every word that we say. Last week I teased that we would talk about how climate science and the government and kind of the dynamic that is there. And I started to do some researching. I was interviewing a few people, and I realized I wanted a little more time for that story because I found some meat, and I think I can really dig my teeth into it for the next, I don't know if next week, but maybe the week after. So we haven't forgotten about it, and I'm certainly I can't wait to show you all kind of what some of the things I found when it comes to climate science and the government and the roles that certain people play. But I think that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find us online, we're on Twitter at The Weather WX Junkies. We're on Facebook. You can listen to us on SoundCloud, and you're probably listening, if you're listening to us right now, you're on YouTube, and you can also find us on iTunes. We will have an episode next week, even though it's Thanksgiving. So please join us then, and we're going to try to do it live again. I hope it worked out. Something we're testing out with the Google Hangout application. So yeah, please join us next time.
Yeah, send your suggestions and your comments in, and we will talk to you next week.
Thanks.